Hello.
Good morning.
So we're going to talk about data again from a somewhat different perspective, and we have two amazing experts. Michael Green is an economist. He used to work at DFID. He's an author with Matthew Bishop of Philanthrocapitalism. Yep. He's one of the 100 most connected men in the UK, whatever that means. But most importantly, he created something called the Social Progress Index. Started playing around with this idea in 2010 and launched it in 2013. It's a really different way to look at how are we making progress besides the traditional form of GDP. So we're going to come back to that because it's all about the kind of data that we really need to be thinking about as we launch the SDGs. Our other panelist is Mats Granryd, who's the CEO of the GSMA, which is the Mobile Operators Association. 800 mobile operators come together. It's a big job, a lot of bosses. He was in the business himself with 2 different companies for over 15 years, so he knows his bosses, but he also knows there's some real opportunities with this sector. And I'll tell you a little bit in a minute as we ask him to speak about that. But I also want you to know that in his high school days, he was a student, although he's from Sweden, he was a student in Iowa where he learned all about cow tipping. And I'm certain that has something to do with where he's gone with his career. But we're going to start by talking first about the way we think about data as we approach the SDGs. And so, Michael, if you would begin with the work that you did. You were birthed during the MDGs, which were a different era. Those goals were about ending poverty. Now we're talking about getting people into prosperity. They were simpler. They were a little more straightforward, but you actually broke the mold in how we use data by creating the Social Progress Index. How are you now thinking about using it for the SDGs?
Right. Thanks, Kathy. Morning, everyone. I mean, the talk earlier this day has been about sort of moonshots. And I must say it's funny, I go around the world and people talk to me as if GDP was handed down from God on tablets of stone. And of course it wasn't. It was invented by an economist, about 85 years ago. And so we're living in a paradigm that we've created, which means that we actually can create a better paradigm. And what emerged from the Social Progress Index very much emerged from the financial crisis. There's that old saying, you manage what you measure. And we were measuring GDP, we were managing our societies to create more GDP, and we ended up in that frightful mess. So really it was sort of a group came together around 2010, including Skoll Foundation. Matthew Bishop was part of that. A whole group of us came together and said, well, look, why don't we try and design a different paradigm? And one that's relevant for every country. Because the MDGs were great, but they were focused on poverty. And we said, well, look, we need a frame for every country. The development challenge isn't just for poor countries, it's for everyone. And so that was what emerged was the Social Progress Index. And the big thing about Social Progress Index is it's not there to replace GDP. It's to sit alongside as a complement to GDP. If I just show you how we built it, we sort of created a framework that measures what makes a good society. We went out, we read a lot of literature, we consulted with a lot of people, with economists, political scientists, people in pubs, and came up with this sort of framework of what makes a good society. It's basically 3 things. A good society is one where everyone has the basic needs of survival: food, water, shelter, safety. A good society is one where everyone has those building blocks of a better life: education, information, health, and a good quality environment. And finally, a good society is one where everyone has the rights, freedoms, and opportunity to advance their knowledge to really pursue their hopes and dreams. And that's a framework that we found consciously very much aligned with the SDGs. We started this before the SDGs, we kept an eye on it, and I think it shows there's a real consensus about what makes a good society. We can often pretend it's all debatable. Actually, there's a huge amount of agreement, and that's captured in the SDGs. And so what we've done is just, on this slide here, just mapped out how the SDGs fit with the Social Progress Index. So very much, Social Progress Index is a way of measuring the SDGs, the spirit and the concepts of the SDGs, perhaps with the exception of SDG 8, which is on economic growth. But really, we've got a way that it's Social Progress Index for countries, for states, for cities, for communities, can be a really practical way of measuring progress against the SDGs.
And how are you combining data from pubs with data from statistical offices? Do they go together at all?
So
Not to mention big data.
So this is one of our opportunities in the sense that there's the formal reporting systems for the SDGs, which are absolutely critical. But we're actually, because we're a non-profit, we can improvise a bit and bring together different forms of data. Wouldn't say it's perfect, really keen to improve. Looking forward to a conversation with Mads offline later about how we can work more together to find new forms of data. But I'm really excited. I think we've got huge opportunities to measure all these concepts better and make the SDGs real in every community. And that way we'll drive action.
Great. Well, Mats, when you took office with GSMA a year ago, you said one of the first things you wanted to do was to pull the entire industry behind the SDGs. So big deal to have a whole industry come together, competitors working together for something, and not just behind one goal, but behind the totality of the framework. Why mobile operators? Why the SDGs?
Well, from cow tipping to SDGs, then it's a pretty big leap. But I think one of the reasons why I left my previous job as the CEO of European mobile operators was the fact that the SDGs are so important for the planet. We're trying to end poverty, combat climate change, and fight injustice and inequality, all done by 2030. And it's not so that one company can do it. It's not so that one government can do it. It has to be much, much broader than that. And I saw GSMA, whom I knew before, as a fantastic, powerful, sector-wide entity to be able to influence the SDGs. So why mobile operators? Well, we compete heavily every single day, as we all know. And but there is one thing that unites us, and that is the common purpose that we have, that we strive to connect everyone and everything to a better future. And that better future, I don't see anything better than the SDGs to try to create that better future. Mobile operators, we have an awesome reach. We connect today more than 5 billion individuals globally, and that's a couple of the stats that we will talk about later, Michael, I'm sure. So if there is one industry-wide sector that can actually influence the SDGs, I would argue it's the mobile operators. And as you know, it's not an 18th goal called the ICT goal. The ICT community underpins all 17 goals. For us, data is important too, exactly what you said. What gets measured, what gets measured gets done. And every year we launch a mobile impact report where we clearly show empirically the progress that the mobile operators are doing towards these 17 goals. So this is the second edition, and I'm really proud to say that we are doing progress towards all 17 goals from a GSMA perspective. We have just launched a couple of months ago a Big Data for Social Good initiative, because big data is certainly the next step now of trying to understand how in times of disasters, in times of pandemics, how are we as individuals moving around, how are the communication being affected. So big data for social good is an initiative from the mobile operators. We have today 19 mobile operators that are together in this initiative, covering roughly 2 billion people, 100 countries. And we're now collecting data and very carefully anonymizing that data, working strictly with the code of conduct, because that's the other side of this, that we need to be very, very mindful of to make sure that we anonymize the data. We're working with, I think it's 8 or 10 UN different organizations, UN Foundation being one, WHO, ITU, UNDP, etc. To make sure that we are within the right boundaries. And this data that we're collecting, we will now overlay other types of data on that data. So infrastructure, where do we have roads, what's the weather going to be like, etc., etc., and the propensity of diseases. So we will try to create this map of understanding in times of disaster, how are we going to react?
So, Queen Rania talked a little bit about data equity, and we say two things. You can't have good policy without good data. And if data isn't from everyone, particularly women, it can't be for everyone. So how do you think about these issues of protecting data, ensuring the data genuinely represents the truth and isn't something that is fake news and fake information? Michael, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah. No, I mean, one of the roles we see of our organization is data advocacy. There are so many gaps in the data. And, some of that is because, for example, an issue like shelter, because it wasn't part of the MDGs, really measurement of that issue has lapsed. A whole range of issues. We would love to have a gender lens on every single aspect of social progress. Not yet. I mean, even things like violence against women, we can't get the right data. So that's another area. Things like mental health. Some of these new challenges that we're facing, they're going to be increasingly important. We've not yet caught up on measuring. So I think there's a huge data agenda that we've got to do if we're really going to measure what's going on in our societies and really get a handle on what's happening and really get a handle on improving. But I'm also optimistic because I think with the technologies we have available, we can catch up really quickly if we can innovate to really measure what our world is really like so we can get a handle on it and make it better.
No, I agree with you. I think this is going to be one of the big topics going forward, that we have this awesome power of the data that we're collecting, but used rightly, it is a fantastic power. Used wrongly, it can be completely devastating. So it is a double-edged sword, and the mobile operators and my board, we're talking continuously about this, on how to make sure that data is treated with the utmost respect, anonymized, etc. And I'm actually very hopeful for this. It's sort of the, I don't know if you heard the saying, which I learned yesterday, which I thought was pretty good, on the man that, or woman that invented the pen. Now, the pen can be used to write a very nice letter, or it can be used to stab someone in the back. The power is up to us how we want to use this power, and I'm pretty sure that we will come to terms and find good ways of using the data, as long as it's true data. And I think the work that the mobile operators are doing is very true. And remember, we are also heavily regulated. Mm-hmm. You know, there is no way that data will be sifted off into other areas. There are other players there collecting data, but it's not the mobile operators. And we need to be so mindful of this. So it's a continuous discussion, and I'm pretty sure that we will find good ways and good sort of boundaries to work with it.
So, you know, there's less than 5,000 days left between now and the end of our deadline of 2030. Not that we're counting yet, but the countdown clock is just coming soon. How do we think about what are the most urgent priorities? Certainly we'll do a stock taking in 2020, maybe back in this theater. But where would you each say you would hope to see some real progress being made first that would pave the way for the hockey stick? Is it with governments? Is it with the technology itself? Where would you start? Let me turn to you, Matt.
No, I think that industry-wide activities needs to be done. You know, more companies is fine, but we need to take a more industrial view. It needs to be systemic. We're working with trials in certain areas, that's fine, but we need to rapidly move away from trials to make a systemic change. A change of the way that we view SDGs. And I particularly like what you said on the GDP, that it's a God-given right, which it's not, obviously. It's just one of the measures. The people on the planet I mentioned is equally important. And I'm sure that many of our members are now working towards measuring not only profit, that's important, but also the people and the planet I mentioned. We need to get that ingrained into our systems.
Maybe I can answer your question with a bit of data.
So how refreshing.
When the SDGs were launched, we did some work with Deloitte, one of our supporters, on to say, can we achieve the SDGs? And the way we worked on this was that because we have no GDP in the social progress model, we can look at the relationship between social progress and GDP per capita. And hopefully we've got a slide coming up. Here we go. So what we've done is simply just plotted social progress against GDP per capita, and these are all the countries of the world. And then we've just put a regression line showing the average relationship between GDP and social progress. And what you see is that the dots above the line are countries that are good at turning their GDP into social progress, or better at turning their GDP into social progress, and the countries below the line are worse at it. Our world is sitting here. It's below the line. So this is telling us something really important at the beginning, which is resources are a constraint, but actually with the resources we have, we should be doing so much better. So that's a really important point. We then said, well, look, let's forecast and say, can we get to the SDGs? So we converted the SDGs into a social progress score. We think a score of sort of 75 is a way of getting us to the SDGs. And then we sort of extrapolated out from that. And what we saw was that if we go all the way to sort of 2015, even if the world economy grows very quickly, we're only going to see a pretty small improvement in social progress. Economic growth on its own is not going to get us to the SDGs. Business as usual will not get us to the SDGs. We're going to have to do things differently. We're going to have to allocate resources differently. We're going to have to find innovations. Right. I think there's a bunch of quick wins that we can do, things that we have solved. Things like water and sanitation we should be able to deliver. Other things are going to be more challenging. So there's a big call for innovation if we're going to get there.
Well, clearly these two guys know that business as usual is not going to work. That is the underlying principle of the SDGs themselves. That they are really something very different. So thank you for helping us see the way, and let's keep collecting that good data and using it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.